Are you a sex worker seeking community with other sex workers? A space where we can just be our true selves? Join our free Authentic Relating sessions, created by and for sex workers across the industry. Whether you're a dancer, performer, creator, or any of the fancy naked people in our community, online or in person, this space is for us. We explore honest, present moment conversations that help us feel seen, heard, and understood. Building genuine connections that prioritize communication, community, and authenticity. Our weekly sessions include a public audio-only space for sex workers and allies to connect and grow, and a private video-enabled space for a deeper connection and support among sex workers only. This is our space to thrive in community and connection. Learn more at bit.ly/SW Authentic Relating. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. Welcome to 2025. Thank you so much for hanging on and listening. This is year 6 into the show, which is blowing my mind. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice little break. Hopefully, maybe you've had a break. Maybe you're working and hustling over the holidays. I know I was. It's a nonstop shop over here. If you are new here, this show is all about destigmatizing the sex industry, and I do that by bringing on different guests every single week to talk about their corner of the industry because it is very vast. So talking about, on-screen talent, we have cam models, we have people from nonprofit organizations and charities that help advocate for sex worker rights. We have people behind the scenes. We have clients sometimes on the show, very rarely, but sometimes we do. I really want to be able to paint a really accurate representation and portrayal of what the work actually is. And I do that through education and humanizing sex workers. So every week, of course, we bring on someone new to chat about a topic of choice. And this person I invited on because I'm just admiring all the work that she does. And we're going to be talking about like nonprofit organizations, talking about funding, what is needed, what the landscape is currently looking like, how to get involved. I get that question so much, and I don't know what it is. It's a seasonal thing, but it's always around the holiday times. I know the holidays just passed, but it shouldn't just be limited to just the holiday time. This was why I'm wanting to debut this episode and right now in January. So I'm really wanting to bring some of these questions to the forefront today. So that's just a little sneak peek of what we're going to be talking about. But if you want to fast forward, I just want to quickly say hello and thank all our lovely Patreon subscribers. Hi, hello, thank you for joining me on this really wild ride over the past few years. If you are curious, I do have a Patreon, which is all about bonus episodes, exclusive content. You see the full video access, which is not included anywhere else. You can kind of see who I'm bringing onto the show, fun little tidbits, some guest lecturing that I do at universities and stuff like that. Really, really cool discussion and people that are on the Patreon there. So if you're interested, we've got tiers starting as low as $4 a month, and it goes up to, I think, $10 a month. So it's like 4, 6, and 10. And that, gets you all this exclusive access, a really cool community that's on there with like-minded people that also want to help advocate for sex worker rights. I just want to say a quick hello to those who are on the top tier. So you guys are spanning from all over the world, which I think is really cool. I will say a quick hello to Ruby from Victoria, Canada. We've got Raina all the way from Sweden. I've got Dale Flood in my hood in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Dale from Red Door, or not Dale, Dan from Red Door Products from Seattle, Washington. McKenna King from Ottawa. Bia York, also from Seattle as well. And Erica Rajo and Geyser. I still don't know where you're from, but if you ever wanted to let me know what location you're in, you're welcome to drop it on one of the posts on Patreon. But thank you all for subscribing for all these years. If you're curious, you can check it out. It's patreon.com/stripped by Sia. All of your funds there go to hosting my website, strippedbysia.com. That's exactly where your funds are going, which is a great help. And also, if I'm ever able to go to any adult industry related events, I'm just not sure what the landscape is looking for 2025, but that's also where your funds would go as well. So thank you. Thank you. Check it out. It's patreon.com/stripped by Sia. And if you're here, I never do this, but I'm kind of switching up for the new year. If you do like the show and you have been listening for a while and you are subscribed, have you considered writing a review or rating 5 stars? I mean, Spotify tells me there's like thousands of subscribers that are on there, but there's only 30 reviews on there. So feel free to do your part. That is a great way of helping. And, for discoverability and for other people to find out about the show. So you can do that. You can engage in some of the polls as well that I put out every week. Basically, I just want to hear from you. And also, I mean, I want the ratings too, whether they're good or bad, but be honest. Do your part. You can do that on Apple and Spotify. All right, 5 minutes in. As promised, I will be introducing our guest today, who I admire with all the work that she has done in the industry. And it goes far back, which I'm like, when I was kind of digging around, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about sex worker rights, organizations, how to get involved, funding, what your funding does, where does that go? We're having a big conversation about this, and I invited Savannah Sly on, who is a co-director of the New Moon Network, who will be talking about New Moon Network as well later on the show. But they are a sex worker. She's also a musician, dominatrix. From what I've seen, over 10 years of organizing, which is incredible, and really helping advancing sex worker rights. So I am very pleased to bring Savannah on the show. So please welcome Savannah Sly. I'm
Hey,
like doing clapping.
Steph. Hello, everybody
Hey.
at home. It's wonderful to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast. I will totally review it because I get some great information from this source and all of the wonderful guests you have on. And it's an honor to be here today.
Thank you. I'm so glad that our paths have finally crossed and you were so happy to, accept my really humble invitation for you to come into the show. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to kind of dig into things with both hands, feet, everything in our conversation today. Um, Feel free to give yourself your own introduction. Again, like I just like dig around, I click around to see like what can I gather. But there's so much more to that, so feel free to go ahead.
Sure, I think you did a great job, but I go by the name Savannah Sly. I've been a sex worker for a very long time, since I was 18, which was a good while ago. And I started work in Boston. I grew up in Vermont, which is where I'm calling in from. I've lived in Seattle for a long time, which is where I actually got the most tapped into sex worker community and sex worker organizing. I'm a haphazard organizer. I just learned as I went and really got my butt kicked along the way, learning as you go, but it's really important. It feels like work that must be done, especially with what we have ahead of us in this world. I love to play music. I love to smoke pot and do yoga. I love to go dancing, hang out with my friends. And but yes, I'm a sex worker still. And yes, I am very honored to be able to run New Moon Network with my co-director Melody Garcia, which is a national organization dedicated to channeling more resources into the movement for sex workers' rights in the US.
Amazing. And we know I'm a part of a couple organizations up here in Canada. We definitely need resources big time,
Mhm.
which we'll definitely sink our teeth in later on in the episode. But you're chatting about like you've been a sex worker first and foremost. You've been a sex worker since the tender age of 18. Maybe we can start the story there in terms of like how you got started. Why did you decide to do sex work? Like everyone has their own motivations, but I'd love to hear your own personal story.
Sure, I've told this story, it feels like 1,000 times, and I'm going to try and abbreviate it for today's conversation. But essentially, I was broke. I was living in Boston and I was going to art school. And I was living on my own, and working part time for minimum wage was not cutting it to pay my rent and also buy the supplies I needed for school. And so I was really stressed and, compromised on, it's like, do I buy groceries or do I buy film for my photography class? So not totally dire, but money was a big stress point. And then I discovered Craigslist erotic services, and I found myself working on Craigslist erotic services. Long story short, but I didn't really realize what I would be doing. I knew what a topless massage was. I signed up for that. I didn't know that a hand job was involved. And so I had to really confront my own whorephobia at age 18 when
Wow.
presented with the opportunity to give a hand job with a topless massage. And I remember this terrible, terrible feeling in the kind of solar plexus of my chest. Um, and telling the woman who was training me, I'm like, I can't give a hand job for money. And she's like, well, why not? And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
not a prostitute. And she sat me
Mhm.
down and she said, are you a virgin? And I said, no. And she's like, has it always been for love? And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, I recommend you try this. You don't have to, no one's going to make you, but I think you should try this. And so I did. And I had this terrible, terrible feeling in my stomach right up until the client walked in. And as soon as he walked in, it was a complete flow state. It was showtime. We took our tops off, we rubbed him down, we gave him a hand job, we snuggled with him, he took a shower. And while he was taking a shower and my colleague was counting the money and kind of cleaning up, I remember thinking, I feel like a healthcare provider. I just provided somebody with a really important service that I think is good for their well being. And then he left. And my coworker, who was a little older than me, she opened the door to the next door hotel room. We had adjoining rooms, which is where the rest of the girls were working, as well as our manager, who was a pretty, uh, not a great guy. Some people would describe him as a pimp. But my colleague handed all of our money over to this man, and he counted it out, and he gave me either 60 or $80. And I remember feeling like I had hit the jackpot. Like I'm getting paid like more than 10 times what I make in an hour at any other job I can access. And I was in, and I've been a sex worker ever since, but in that group, it really I was radicalized because we had this bad manager, but he hired all these amazing women with all these different backgrounds, different ages, different professional backgrounds, different countries we were from, different ethnicities and genders. And we eventually all decided that he was bad news because he was coercive and violent and doing substances when he should be our security and taking unequal cuts of our money. And we essentially organized and fired him and started our own collective. I know.
What?
It
This is
was
your first experience?
yes, and it was
Wow.
I want to write a screenplay about it because we had women from different countries. We had trans women. We have women of color in the US. We had women who had their own substance issues or who came from really wealthy families and were going to Harvard. And then we had art students like me. It was just this whole Crayola color box of all these different women who were trying sex work for the first time. And this guy, who was a great recruiter, but a real shithead, hired us all. And we kicked him out and started our
Wow.
own service in Boston. And we were very successful. And
Wow.
eventually we all fragmented. Some people started doing full service escorting. I became a dominatrix. People had their own life journeys. I'm still in touch with some. Actually, one of these women is going to come up and celebrate Christmas with me. This is over 20 years
Amazing.
later.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I'm still in touch with a few of them. But ever since that group, eventually I went independent. I became a dominatrix, and now I kind of do really whatever I feel like, whether it's escorting or porn or doming or massage, whatever. It's like I am in this for life. I love this career. But that moment, radicalized me because we had no defenses against this exploitative manager. We couldn't call law enforcement because they would just arrest us. We couldn't tell our families what we were doing. Like most of us were like deeply in the closet about our work. And he was trying to blackmail us. He was calling the cops on us when he would see our ads after we fired him. We had no support from society to defend ourselves from this bad guy when we were doing work that, as I said, I felt like a healthcare provider. Um, and I've always carried that with me. Um, And so eventually I moved to Seattle many years later, and that was the only other time I really discovered sex work community. I discovered Swap Seattle, which was a chapter of Swap USA, which is largely now defunct now. And then I got really into community building, and then the end demand or Nordic model started being
Yes.
campaigned heavily for in Seattle, and our
Mm-hmm.
clients were being arrested. Asian workers were having their in-calls raided. They shut down
Mm-hmm.
our review board. It was like a precursor to Sesta Fosta, and I just was so angry, and I've been angry ever since. And spending all my free time trying to learn how to organize with other sex workers, and it's brought me to running New Moon, which is now more about philanthropy. But it's been a long journey. But that's how I started, and I'm still a sex worker happily.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What? Oh my gosh. There's so many nuggets in that and just an incredible story. I can't believe that was your first experience in sex work at 18. Wow. That is just so rare.
But it just goes to show how important community is. Isolation is one of the deadliest factors in the sex trade, especially like we are seen as cash cows by um if we get labor rights, and some of us have labor rights, if you work in clubs or if you work on sets, you have some labor rights. We could use more, but a lot of us have zero labor rights as independent contractors or employees, or we're just criminals. But we're still seen as cash cows by people who would like to manage us unethically and
Right.
exploit us and extract money from us. And it's usually men. Men cannot make as much money in this job as we can. And if I had not been in a group where this guy had recruited other women, who some of them were a little older and a little wiser than me, if I had been all alone with this guy, who knows how long I could have worked for him, what situations I would have found myself in. And I found myself in some dangerous situations with him, even with those people around me. And then he tried to use the laws against us like a real abuser. And so I really lucked out that I had at
Yeah.
least 6 colleagues who all were able to say, like, yeah, you know what? This is not safe and this is not cool. And why are we giving him all of our money? And so I do think I think a lot about why the sex trade has such a bad rap and why we're up against so much opposition. And I've been trying to think about our opposition. We call them SWERFs, sex work
Mm-hmm.
exclusionary radical feminists. Some of them are unreachable, and it just makes them, the whole idea of the sex trade makes them uncomfortable. But a lot of them are earnestly concerned because people have terrible experiences in this industry, and you can be railroaded, you can be exploited, you can be hurt, you can be murdered. And so a lot of sex worker advocacy for me is trying to identify these points at which we are more or less safe. And so at New Moon, we are kind of monitoring the sex worker rights movement in the US and what these groups are doing. And it's like community building is a number one safety priority. Just getting together and having a potluck, getting together and having a clothing swap, because then you see other people who are in your industry. And if you're having a problem, or if you're just talking shop, you can compare your experience to other people and maybe identify whether something is not right in your situation. And then you have people that you can maybe talk to try and get some help who are going to be non-judgmental. I know that's a tangent, but my story
No, it's a great tangent.
so much. And the number one thing I learned was the importance of having colleagues for safety.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I forgot to say in the beginning of the show, if people are wondering, are you a sex worker? Yes, I am a sex worker. It's been over 10 years. I started off as a sugar baby, very much alone because it was very not allowed to talk about that kind of stuff. And like, I
Mhm.
had my own thing about like, I'm going to be telling myself and for everyone that looking around me that I'm on these business lunches with these sugar daddies because that was my own defense mechanism. And that's like, that was going to make me feel better about my own whorephobia. And I was like, I'm not one of those. And it was very, very alone and very isolating. And I couldn't talk to anyone about this work. And I didn't know what I was doing was like unsafe. And no one could relate to anything that I was saying.
Everything you're saying, the whorephobia, like the whorephobia I had, I'm not a prostitute. I can't do this. I got over that pretty quickly when
Hmm.
I was handed cash, and I'm like, oh, I'm totally a prostitute. I can totally do this because that's a lot of money for a really easy job.
Yes.
But sugaring, I've done sugaring. I did sugaring after I'd done escorting quite a bit. So it's like I kind of like knew the
Oh,
drill. I was just like,
wow.
yeah, when Sesta Fosta came down, you bet your ass I was on Seeking Arrangement looking for clients and just trying to fill my dance card just because I didn't know what
Hmm.
was going to happen. It was scarcity mentality.
Right.
But sugar babies are incredibly vulnerable because they might not even know to contact sex worker groups for camaraderie or for help or information. And this is a pattern of patriarchy is removing information and removing ways for us to connect with each other. You see this in more religiously oriented communities where it's like you're not allowed to talk about sex. You know, if you can't talk about sex, remove sex work. If you can't
Yeah.
talk about sex, then you're having sex in unsafe ways. Sex is going to happen. It's just going to be more
Yes.
dangerous. Their goal is for you to only have sex in sanctioned ways under certain circumstances. If you happen to be gay, you have no access to community. You're isolated, and that's very dangerous. And maybe these entities want for it to be dangerous because they would rather you not exist than to have you exist in your fullness and have community and be gay. Another tangent, but I think about this all the time with what's coming down the pipe with Project 2025, the Trump
Hmm.
administration, and all of these
Yes.
organizations and groups and leaders who want to censor us, take away our access to information, make it harder to connect with each other, and make sex work so dangerous that we are really beholden to real assholes who are our clients. You know, they'd rather not be clients. They don't want us making money. They want it. They want access to us. Sex is about power, and sex workers wield power. We demand reciprocity, and really violent patriarchal forces don't like that we demand reciprocity, that we hold any power. And so all these things we're seeing in these more tyrannical spaces are to dismantle and try and take away that power, which is access to information and access to each other for community at its most basic form.
Hmm. Well, okay, hang on. Hold that thought because we will be talking about more of that stuff later in more detail. Um, Going back to the organizing part too, like again, you really lucked out with that first place that you were working at and having the opportunity to having the opportunity and the exposure and power being surrounded by, you know, really strong, independent sex workers is amazing, first of all, to hear, but also like getting that exposure to that, like how did that make you feel at that point? And did you know you were going to go this far in terms of advocating and activism?
So I have a natural desire to stick it to the man. And I don't, I mean, maybe it's inherent to me, but when I was in middle school, um, my family's home in Vermont was raided by the FBI, and my father was imprisoned for selling marijuana across state lines. A whole lot of marijuana, like an
Mm.
amount that makes me proud. But my family, I come from a family of musicians and artists who don't historically make a lot of money, but we had kind of a comfortable middle class upbringing because my parents sold a lot of weed. Um, and so, in the experience of having my father imprisoned, my mom becoming all of a sudden the breadwinner for the household, um, and the FBI, like the surveillance, all of it, you know, and then experiencing the stigma, realize because I didn't just realizing that my family sold weed and having to address the whole drug dealer stigma, which I was very much unaware of what my parents were doing. That also radicalized me. I got to learn about the war on drugs in high school, which I was fascinated by because it was my life. And I got really interested in propaganda, which I learning about Nazi Germany, which I was also fascinated by. And so when the sex trafficking hysteria hit Seattle around 2013, I was really well positioned to understand what this was. This is propaganda. Um, it's not even binary. It's a singular view of a deeply complex field, just like drugs are complicated, right? We
Right.
have coffee, we have medications, we have weed, we have heroin, we have bath salts, we have all these different kinds of drugs, right? And you can't categorize them or treat them all as one thing. The sex trade is the same thing. We have phone sex, we have escorting, we have street work, we have BDSM dungeons, we have all different kinds of porn, we have relationships, we have sugaring, we have trophy wives. You know, you can't treat all those things the same way with a policy. Um, And so when the only thing I wasn't prepared for, and this was the extra fire to my fuel, was I thought that in Seattle, when I was seeing all these headlines about sex trafficking and all this harm was suddenly happening, shutting down in calls and arresting clients en masse, like
Mhm.
hundreds of clients being arrested at a time. I was like, these people have never met sex workers. And at this
Likely.
point, I finally had the vocabulary sex work. I didn't have the phrase sex work until I'd been doing sex work for maybe 4 years. So I had that phrase. I knew what sex work was. I had Swap Seattle. We were having brunches and having a wonderful time. And I was finally back with sex work community. Um, and I was like, hey, Swap Seattle people, they're having a town hall about sex trafficking. They just don't know we exist. This work looks really scary from the outside. Let's go and listen and introduce ourselves. I thought that there might be room for a balanced conversation. And
Ooh.
we went, and not only was there not room for a balanced conversation, but I realized that we were antithetical to the propagandist agenda.
Mhm.
There's no room for autonomous sex workers in the radical anti sex work, anti trafficking narrative. It's
Right.
all victims, and all those victims tend to be young white women and girls, right? Um, and so we made quite a splash during Q&A is the time to make a splash. If you're going to go to an
Yes.
oppositional like town hall, wait patiently until Q&A, fan your people out in the auditorium so you're not clustered in a group, and raise your goddamn hand and then ask some hard questions. And
Yeah.
that's what we did. And we asked some hard questions. And so we got the attention of some reporters who were looking for balanced coverage from The Stranger, which is a really big alt weekly in Seattle. And
Mhm.
and the offense that was taken to our presence and the way that we were talked over and shut down and told that um, this wasn't about us. This was about sex trafficking. And we're going to shut down the sex trafficking trade. It was just so dismissive and clearly had an agenda, and we were a problem. There was no reaching across. There was no opportunity for collaboration because it's like, as we know, it's like I don't call myself a survivor, but it's like I was threatened with a gun by that bad manager that I talked about. And he tried to blackmail me and my colleagues into continuing to work for him after we fired him. So technically, I have operated in the sex trade under threats of violence and coercion. Um,
Mhm.
and so the fact, and I'm not alone. A lot of us have these
Yeah.
experiences, and the fact
Yes.
that that we were seen as a threat and offensive in this space pissed me off so bad that I was fueled on pure rage. And it was the rage not just of my experience in sex work, not just this one isolated incident, but also of my dad being imprisoned and my mom being made a single mom for 4 years in a rural part of the country where she had to work like three shitty jobs. I was so angry. Um, that I got deeply involved in Swap Seattle. We started haphazardly organizing and protesting. We didn't know the first thing about how to change the laws, who to talk to. We were literally we would go to legislature and just like make a big fuss. And eventually a kind person to be like, if you want to be successful, you need to schedule an appointment with lawmakers who represent your district. And we're like, and I
Right.
was like, I didn't even know that when I started. It was really a learning journey, and the learning continues. Anyways, all of that is to say that I stumbled into activism out of an urgent need, a feeling of needing to stop the harm that was happening to my communities. And after over a decade, I have learned a couple of skills. And at New Moon, I work with an amazing team of people who have their own versions of that journey, and we have different skills. And we try and support sex worker and survivor led organizations around the US however we can with funding or pilot programming to help them be more effective as activists and advocates, or with technical assistance, which is essentially us relaying the information that we have accumulated as a team over the years.
Gotcha. Gotcha, gotcha. Um,
Hi, it's Carly David, founder of PS Group, marketing agency for sex workers by sex workers. We're here to give you the tools you need to stand out. From slick websites to next level marketing strategies, we want to turn your fans into loyal customers. Our fees are project based, no commissions, no percentages. We believe you should keep the rewards of your hard work. So if you're serious about taking your brand to the next level, visit us at sexworkmarketing.com. Say hello. We'd love to talk to you.
You were mentioning New Moon Network. Obviously, you've dotted throughout this entire episode. Let's shift the focus to New Moon and talk about what New Moon is. I know you briefly mentioned it in the beginning, but just to bring that to the forefront, maybe we could go have a spotlight on that for now.
Sure. New Moon Network is a national organization dedicated to channeling more resources into the movement for sex workers' rights in the US. We have three areas of work that we focus on. One is philanthropic education. Philanthropy is the act of giving money to a charitable cause because you believe it will make the world a better place. So you can think of Bill and Melinda Gates or Mackenzie Scott. They are very wealthy people who have done very well in business, and now they have foundations where they are giving out money to organizations around the world that they think make the world a better place. But you and I can also be philanthropists, and actually, sex workers are amazing at philanthropy because we kick ass at mutual aid.
Yes, we
Mutual
do.
aid is, I believe, a form of philanthropy. So when we all pool some funds, whether it's $1, $20, $5, to help our colleagues cover their basic needs, that is community philanthropy. So at New Moon, we educate philanthropists, usually on the bigger scale, about sex workers' rights and why they should be funding sex workers' rights. Our second bucket of work is ideally unlocking that money from philanthropists. They're like, oh, yes, Savannah, great idea. Here's $50,000. Then we take that money and we distribute it into the movement. So every month we give out 5 $1,000 micro grants.
Amazing.
We know that a lot of sex worker groups do a lot with a little bit. And
Yes.
so we use these micro grants to start to learn who's out there. There are hundreds of sex worker orgs in the US. So we want to learn about them, send them some money that they can do, they can do their work with, and then start to build a relationship. But our third bucket of work is capacity building. We know that it takes more than just money to move the movement. As if when I was a young activist in Seattle, if somebody had given me $10,000, I would have been over the moon, but I might not have known how to use that money most effectively. I might not have known about budgeting. I might not have known about really strategically thinking about our goals as a group. There might have been infighting in our group about how to use the money, and I might not know how to address that conflict or those disagreements. So at New Moon, we also try and offer programs to offer education and support to sex worker advocates who are in these groups all around the country. So the program I'm most proud of is called Spokes Hub. Spokes Hub is a virtual, free online academy for anyone with lived experience in the sex trade. If you identify as a survivor of sex trafficking, you are welcome at Spokes Hub. If you identify as a sex worker, you are welcome at Spokes Hub. If you identify as something in between, being like, oh, I'm a sugar baby, I'm kind of not a sex worker, it's like, fine, you do you. You're welcome at Spokes Hub to take classes about grant writing, understanding legislative terms and how the legislature works, how to talk to the media, how to stay safe as a sex worker. We offer hard skills, but then we also recognize that sex workers are not a monolith. We have a lot of different experiences and backgrounds and identities that inform our experience in sex work. So we try and have guest educators come to talk about what is the experience of cisgendered male sex workers and how can we advocate for them? What's it like to be a migrant sex worker working in the United States? Or how does race, gender, and class affect the sex work experience? And then also we have people come in and educate about sex trafficking and exploitation in the sex trade because some sex workers are not aware of that. And a lot of us are
Mm-hmm.
skeptical of
Yeah.
those viewpoints because they've been weaponized as propaganda against our rights. So we're trying to melt the divide between survivors and workers to understand that we all have a lot of very similar values and very similar goals as far as changing the laws.
Wow, that's
So that's
incredible.
what we do at New Moon.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I can't wait to hear more about the other programs you might have as well. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but talking about that first bucket in terms of like philanthropy, education, and talking about money. And this is a question that is very general, not specifically. It doesn't have to be specifically towards sex worker rights organizations, but some people have hesitancies giving money to organizations and not knowing where that money is going to be going. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and address that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So New Moon is what you call an intermediary fund. An intermediary fund sits between big capital P philanthropy, those high net worth individuals who are trying to do good with their money, big foundations, groups with endowments, and then also between that and the actual grassroots, between the work being done. So um, let's say Bill and Melinda Gates, or just Melinda Gates now. I think she peeled off and started her
Yeah.
own thing, Pivotal Ventures. Let's say Pivotal Ventures decides that sex work is important for advancing women's rights, and they want to fund the movement for sex workers' rights. Big philanthropy, they give out bigger grants. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 or more. It might be multi-year funding. But as I said, in the movement for sex workers' rights, there's hundreds of these little groups. Capital P philanthropy, A, might not know these groups well enough to know where that money would be most useful. They might not have the cultural competency to engage with these groups or make their grant making process accessible. And they don't have the relationships. Might not know how to find these groups. A lot of us are kind of underground, or we're kind of on social media. So an intermediary fund like New Moon is really helpful in this scenario because we can talk to big philanthropy and be like, hey, the movement for sex workers' rights is exploding in the United States. In fact, we think it's grown visibly by 1,000% since 2015. There's over 200 groups in the United States right now that we can count and reach, as opposed to 20. There was
Right.
like 20
That's
in
incredible.
2015. It's incredible, but it's also indicative of the pressure sex workers have been operating under. We're coming out of the woodwork because of the end demand model, that
Yes.
that anti-trafficking framework, Sesta Fosta, banking discrimination, censorship. We're there's millions of people like me and like you who feel the call to do something. So we're educating philanthropy on talking about why this is an LGBTQ issue, a women's rights issue, a migrant justice, disability justice issue. And when those groups are ready, they're like, that sounds great, New Moon Fund. We don't know these groups. We're just going to give you $50,000. And we would prefer if that $50,000 was used for sex worker groups that are primarily addressing HIV/AIDS in sex working communities. And then we get to go through our catalog. We've given to 80 groups now,
Wow.
through these little, because we're a small fund. We're a small fund and we don't have an endowment. So we got to use our money really wisely. So we use all these little micro grants, $1,000 grants, to make contact, hear about people's work. What are you doing? And some groups are specializing in doing outreach and handing out condoms and
Hmm.
clean needles, or offering sex education information, all of which is directly relevant to preventing HIV/AIDS and other STD and
Hmm.
STI transmission. So we can go through our Rolodex essentially. And for those listening at home who don't know what a Rolodex is, it's a way of organizing your contacts. We can go through our CRM
Hmm.
and we can identify groups that are doing work aligned with preventing HIV/AIDS, and then we take that 50K and we distribute it amongst these groups, maybe in $5,000 grants, you know, giving more, or maybe $10,000 grants. It all depends on what the funder wants.
Right.
So in this way, we act as kind of like an agent to the
Gotcha.
movement
Yeah,
for philanthropy.
that makes sense.
I'm almost done with that point, but I'd like to also mention that anybody wanting to donate to the movement can get in touch with a group like New Moon, and we can help advise them. We also do corporate advising. So I'll just
Amazing.
throw that in
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like talking about, so I guess, yeah, you're kind of in the middle, intermediary fund, in the middle of grassroots organizations and, big philanthropy. And
there.
you've been around since 2022, I believe. So it's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. How has
Um,
that, oh, sorry, continue.
oh, sorry. Are we starting now?
Oh, sorry,
Sorry.
yes. We're going to start now. Did you want to go back to that point that you wanted to include there?
I do.
Let's do it.
So starting from here. So we talk to big philanthropy, but we also talk to corporations, especially in the adult industry, website platforms, porn production companies, and maybe they want to give back to the community. We consult with them and help them identify groups that are doing work aligned with their mission and values. And also for individuals, if you would like to make a donation to a sex worker rights group in the USA, but you need a little guidance or advice and you want to make sure that your money is put to good use, you can contact us at New Moon and we will work with you to help make sure that you pick a really great group.
Wow. I have so many questions right now. So talking about, we're going to stay on this point before we move on, but two questions for you, Savannah. So in your experience and the two-ish years that New Moon Network has been around, have you encountered any challenges getting in touch with big philanthropy, any hesitancy, pushback? Because we're a sex worker organization, we want to connect with sex workers. What has that been like for a New Moon Network?
It has been challenging. Philanthropy is just part of the world, and the world on the whole is not kind towards sex workers or understanding of why we do what we do, what we need to stay safe. And or the world would prefer that we not exist or not be visible, and certainly we see these trends reflected in philanthropy as well. That said, some people in the world, some parts of the world are accepting of sex workers and supportive. I just want to give a shout out to all the Belgian sex
Yes,
workers
yes.
who got employment benefits for sex workers who would like that. That is so inspiring. So, yay, Belgium, for listening to sex workers and working towards us having more agency and power in society and acceptance and safety. So, in philanthropy, we have encountered funding networks and individuals who understand what we're doing and they are down. We have also had great conversations with people who are feminists, feminist funds that are more on the problematic anti-trafficking side. They think they can't imagine how sex work could be something somebody chooses. And in these situations, our goal is to go into the room and say, my name is Savannah. I'm a sex worker. I come in peace. I'm not here to argue with you about decriminalization. I'm not here to argue with you about whether sex workers work. We will not get anywhere with that conversation. You believe what you believe. I know what I know. Let's talk about our common ground. We all care about the same people. Can we at least start to identify our shared values and shared priorities, none of which is getting addressed when we argue about decriminalization? I want to start talking to these funds about discrimination protections because we all believe that regardless of your experience in the sex trade, you should have access to employment and housing moving forward, right? So there are funding opportunities that we're starting to access around those kinds of conversations. But yeah, we've hit some straight up discrimination. We have been in deeply hostile rooms. It is a challenge. It takes a lot of patience and it takes good colleagues and the occasional adult beverage at night to unwind and process and just keep going. But we do need to use our money really wisely because we don't have assured funding. We actually just got our first multi-year funding from ViiV. ViiV is an HIV/AIDS pharmaceutical manufacturer. And so we're going to be able to launch a 3-year program that's an expansion off of our Leadership Academy and our micro granting program. And we're just really thankful to ViiV as a corporation for recognizing that sex workers are stakeholders in HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment. So New Moon is not an experiment. We do at least have that multi-year funding for until 2026, which is amazing. But that said, as far as funds go, we are very small, and we are still forging these relationships and trying to demonstrate the need to fund the movement for sex workers' rights in the U.S. and beyond.
Right. No, that's so great to hear. I mean, first of all, congratulations. That's a huge.
Thank you. It
So
feels so
exciting.
amazing
Yeah, as it should.
to get to plan for the
Absolutely.
future. To be able to make plans, to be able to plan for the future. A lot of sex worker organizations are self-funded. Literally, it's strippers and doms and escorts having a good day at work and taking $50 and putting it towards the community potluck or gas in a car to go to the legislature, um, or their mutual aid fund. And it's really hard to plan for the future. It's hard to have a long-term legislative plan to actually change the laws when you don't have any consistency. And so, with this funding we're getting from VIV, we're expanding our micro grant program, which is just a random $1,000 to sex
Yay.
worker groups in the United States.
Love it.
And we're going to give what we call seed funding. And seed funding is going to be $1,000 a month for a year for up
Wow.
to 15 of our current grantees. We have a team of advisors. We're selecting these groups right now. But we want to see what happens when we take these small grassroots sex worker led organizations and give them that ability to plan ahead for at least a year. You're going to get $1,000 every month. What are you going to do with it? Because a lot of these groups don't have that ability to plan ahead. Or it's like you get one grant, you score a $20,000 grant, and it's like, how can you translate that into sustainability? That's why New Moon has this very different model. Most grant models are like one chunk of change all at once. And that's wonderful. We love that. We applaud giving sex workers money no matter you give it to them. But at New Moon, we have a different approach. A, because of our own constraints in our own funding reality, but then also knowing that consistency might be really helpful
Right.
for some of these groups in
Definitely.
learning budgeting and forecasting and thinking ahead.
So
Just like now we
important.
can think into the future now that we have multi-year funding. Thank you, Vive.
Thank you, Vive. Seriously, that is just again really really great to hear. But talking about funding reality, so I myself sit on a couple boards for organizations here in the city and in Vancouver, and I'm not sure about you, but we are struggling pretty hard. Like, I am co-chairing one organization, and some of the funding that we usually get every year, there that we just think it's like, we always get this every year, has not come in. It has stopped, and they have
Mm.
not given us feedback. And this is happening in a couple of my organizations that I am sitting on. So I'm not sure what is happening, or if it's like politically motivated, or has anything to do with our elections that are coming up next year and stuff like that. But I just want to hear about your experience in the US, or what you might have heard globally in terms of what the funding landscape is looking like right now.
Sure. First of all, I'm really sorry to hear that you're not hearing back from that funder. That's really stressful. And I used to be at Swap USA where we had a similar dynamic with a Craigslist case settlement, where it's like every year we'd get like about $20,000, but we never knew if it was going to keep coming.
Right.
um, and it's really hard to plan it. Like that kind of precarity makes it hard to plan. And then if
Hmm.
you don't hear from them and it's crickets and you can't get a hold of them, you're like, well, I guess we just don't have our funding this year.
Yes.
So my sympathies, my empathy for the stress that that causes,
Thank you.
especially when you're serving our communities, which really need support. Um, the funding landscape for sex workers' rights is, shocker, abysmal. Uh,
No surprise there,
no,
unfortunately.
because nobody appreciates the magic we bring into this world like we do. And pin in this for clients. Hello, shout out to the clients listening. You are our unique funding source. There are foundations, there are granting agencies, there are corporations, and there are sex workers shelling out their own hard-earned dollars to put into our communities. But we also have you, and we depend on you, and we know you love us. We know that you get so much out of our services, and we need you with us in helping to fund our organizations. If you're not sure where to get started, contact New Moon. We will help you get started. Thank you for listening and for caring about us and for being with us in this fight for you and for us to exist.
Yes.
We are advocating for your rights. And so step up to the plate and tip your local organization. Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. So, but the funding landscape for sex workers' rights is pretty abysmal. New
Mhm.
Moon is part of a group called the Sex Work Donor Collaborative,
Okay.
sexworkdonorcollaborative.org. Great place to get information about funding for sex workers' rights. There are a little more than 20 global organizations that do funding, kind of like New Moon does, that are part of this organization. All of them have at least some sex worker grantees in their portfolio. So, what I'm saying now is I'm going to give you some information that hopefully will be very quickly out of date because Sex Work Donor Collaborative has recently surveyed all of their members in 2024 to ask, how much are you giving to sex worker groups? What is that experience like? Let's talk to some of these sex worker groups and see what their experience is like of getting this money. And so, there's about to be data coming out from the Donor Collaborative about at least what these 20 plus groups are giving. But then there's another organization called Human Rights Funder Network.
Okay.
And Human Rights Funder, it's humanrightsfunding.org, amazing website. And they track funding for all sorts of different populations and issue areas around the world. And check this out, sex workers is one of their populations. So it feels really good to see
Wow.
us included and tracked in this data, like
Mhm.
this population matters. And they're going to be coming out with updated data, at least for 2022 and 2023, pretty soon. But the data that I'm about to share with you is from 2020. So, according to Human Rights Funders Network in 2020, funding for sex worker led initiatives around the world accounted for less than 1% of all foundation funding in the globe. So when we talk about the Gates Foundation, Tides Foundation, Society for an Open, Foundation for an Open Society, all these different big foundations that kind of fund movements around the world, we get less than 1% of that.
That's crazy to
Um,
me.
and that totals $18 million
Wow.
globally for the whole movement for sex workers' rights.
Wow.
There are at least 18 million sex workers in the world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we know how intersectional our movement is to women's rights, LGBTQ, racial justice, migrant justice, disability justice, a whole host of things. You want to stop HIV AIDS, you have to include fucking sex workers. You
Yeah.
have to include us. So in 2020, that's the data we have. And it shows some of the top funders. And what's really frightening is I'll send you a link to this,
I
but
would
it
love to
shows
see
the
it.
top 10 funders
Okay.
that contribute to this $18 million in 2020. The really scary part is that two of those funders have withdrawn from the movement of sex workers' rights.
Oh no.
Foundation for a Just Society and Open Society Foundation. I kind of think of them as the same organization, but when you hear right wingers talk about Soros and all the dirty Soros money, is this something you've
Oh
heard, Steph?
no, I have not heard about
In
that.
Canada? So in the United States, it's like we talk about the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers are funding all the right wing bullshit. And the right talks about Soros, George Soros, and all his leftist money going into the leftist agenda. I'm thankful to George Soros because Open Society Foundations has historically funded a lot of sex worker initiatives around the world and actually been a thought partner
Mm.
to sex worker organizations, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia, but specifically Africa.
Huh.
Recently, George Soros passed the baton to one of his sons. Um,
Oh.
and so there has been, I don't think it's an intentional, there's no intention to do harm, I don't think. But what happened is there's been a big reorganization, to
Yeah.
put it very
I was
simply,
gonna
a
say.
big reorganization and the closure of some programs and some global offices. And in that process, LGBTQ organizations and sex worker rights organizations lost a fuck ton of funding and thought partnership. So when I was talking about New Moon, we know it takes more than money. We have all this like technical assistance and these programs. New, Open Society Foundation did the same thing on a global scale for LGBTQ organizations and sex worker organizations. So not only are you losing funding, but you're losing your access to an insider in philanthropy who's going to help you get the job done.
That is so
So,
disappointing.
Sex Work Donor Collaborative actually issued a report this year on the impact of Open Society's withdrawal. So, when we look at this 2020 data from Human Rights Funders Network, we see that 2 of the top 10 funders are no longer in the field.
That is so sad to me. That's so
It's very sad,
disappointing.
but the good news is I don't have hard data right now because these reports have not been issued. And Steph, I would love to come back in 2025 and continue the conversation. But some of the draft data coming out of Sex Work Donor Collaborative indicates that funding has increased from foundations for sex
Good.
workers' rights. I think we've done a really good job of advocating and making our case for the importance of us in movements for gender equality, right? For human rights, for racial justice and migrant justice. So I think the funding has increased according to this early preliminary draft data. But there's also the fact that we have increasingly intolerant and authoritarian regimes, not just in the US, but around the world.
Yes, this is very
So
true.
check this out. I'm trying to hit you up with a, oh, this is great. Oh, this sucks. Oh, but this is okay. But oh, this still
I
sucks.
appreciate the
All is
balance.
not lost. So something that sucks is that the Dutch government has a pretty right-wing parliament now. That sucks for
Wow.
sex workers around the world because the Dutch government has been the largest governmental funder of feminist funds in the US, or no, around the world, not just
Yeah.
the US. So the Dutch government has given a ton of money to groups like Mama Cash. Mama Cash has given to a bunch of sex worker groups and also is a fiscal sponsor to groups like Red Umbrella Fund. Red Umbrella Fund is the only sex worker led fund for sex workers' rights around the world. It's a global fund, and they are part of Mama Cash. Mama Cash gets money from the Dutch government. Some of
Wow.
that, and so it's like this
The
trickle
trickle
down
down
thing.
effect. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's like a good trickle down because it's
Mhm.
like a government giving money to a feminist fund that gives money to a sex worker fund that gives money to sex worker organizations around the world. Now the Dutch government is more conservative, and we have seen previews of their plans to cut funding to feminist funds over the next couple of years. So that means that the Dutch government doesn't give as much money out. Mama Cash gets less money. Red Umbrella Fund gets less
Less
money.
money.
Sex worker
Yeah.
orgs get less money. So that's a real bummer.
Yeah.
That's a real bummer. But the cool part is that there are now groups like the Sex Work Donor Collaborative, that global network of funders I was talking about, and
Mhm.
it's really marvelous to be part of these spaces as New Moon Network because we're a funder
Mhm.
to get this information and talk about it together. What are we going to do
Yeah.
together? And so without letting the cat out of the bag, I'd love to come back in 2025 and talk about what's happened. But the
Yes.
Sex Work Donor Collaborative is on it, and they are exploring other governments that might be willing to pick up the mantle where the
Mm.
Dutch government is going to fail
Right.
us. Parliaments that have not gone more fascist or more
Right.
authoritarian or more conservative. There's also in the US something called PEPFAR, and PEPFAR is really, really important for sex worker funding because PEPFAR is about trying to end AIDS. The
Okay.
US has given a ton of global funding to organizations addressing HIV/AIDS,
Mhm.
but it's always up for renewal.
Mm.
It's not a program that lasts forever. Every new Congress and every new president needs to sign off on PEPFAR funding.
Mhm.
And PEPFAR funding is definitely on the chopping block with the Trump administration,
Of
which means
course.
HIV/AIDS funding will be cut,
Cut.
which
Yeah.
means sex worker rights funding will be cut. LGBTQ groups, women's groups, it's not just sex workers, it's all of our colleagues in all these overlapping groups.
Mhm.
But an upswing, not to be a downer, there's a group called Funders Concerned About AIDS. We're part of their network. And Funders Concerned About AIDS is already on it. They're like, this funding might be cut, and they're trying to mobilize private donors, people who have a buttload of money,
They
to be
do.
like, you care about HIV/AIDS. Will you help us close this gap? So I'm saying all of this to try, because like this is all stuff that we've had to learn at New Moon in the past couple of years.
Mhm.
I didn't go to school for this. I'm a dominatrix, you know? Um, but we've had to learn all this, and I'm just kind of spewing it at you all to give everybody a primer on how the funding landscape works, and some resources where you can all go to learn about this for yourselves. Because as I said earlier, sex workers are amazing philanthropists. We really care about our communities. We engage in mutual aid. We put money in our gas tanks. We feed each other. We help each other's legal defense funds. Knowing this information and where to look can really help us strategize and understand what to expect and maybe where to access those hard to reach dollars.
Yeah, no, this is really great, and I'm glad that you're able to give us so many great examples. I mean, some good news, some bad news for sure, but it's really good to hear. And I didn't know there was like some government funding that was trickling down from there. I had no idea from that.
Yeah, yeah, there's there I mean in Canada, I wish I could pull some stuff out of my head, but Steph, I'd love to talk to you after this and ask the Sex Work Donor Collaborative and be like, "Hey, funds in Canada, what are the best resources for Canadian sex worker groups to go and read about what is possible in their country?"
Yeah,
Right?
no, and I know this show spans across so many different countries as well. So I'd also love to hear from folks in other countries as well. I know this is very like, North America based, but I know there's listeners everywhere. So please reach out. I would love to hear what's happening if like because the question I get a lot is just like where can I access funding or where like it like more so locally and like reaching out to
Okay, so I've
organizations.
got 2 resources
Mhm.
for you. And also, Steph, thank you so much for your time. I know this is like a longer interview,
No, it's
and I
great. I
just
love it.
appreciate the opportunity to come and share this information. So, 2 resources for you all. One is sexworkdonorcollaborative.org. Go on there, read the publications, get familiar with the funding landscape, and then go and view the members. All the members of that donor collaborative, New Moon's one of them, they're all over the world. Some of them only fund in Asia. Some of them only fund in Africa. New Moon only funds in the US. Some of them are global. Those are all groups that recognize the movement for sex workers' rights. Get on their newsletters. Look for funding opportunities. Just emailing them and asking for money is probably not going to get you anywhere,
Yeah.
but getting on their newsletters, following them on socials, understanding what their grant cycles are like, that's a really good way to start to build a relationship with those organizations and work towards accessing funding. At New Moon, we're trying to find grants all the time for our own fund and also for the groups that we serve in the movement. So we have built another tool called Air Directory, AAIR dash directory.org. Air with 2 A's, and I'll give you the link later. Air Directory is a searchable database of a bunch of things. It's a library of all relevant sex worker rights information that we can find and archive, like one pagers about decrim or important podcasts like yours, Steph. Steph, if you went down, if your website was no longer available, Air Directory is trying to catalog this information to make it available for the future.
Cool.
Because our movements are so clandestine and amazing websites come and go, but we want that information. We don't want people spending time making yet another infographic about December 17th because they already
Right.
exist. Okay.
Yes. There's a lot of those.
But also, there's a ton of grants that we find, and we plug them all into Air Directory.
Oh,
So if you
great.
go to Air Directory, yep,
I'm writing this
go to
down.
Air Directory. There's learn it, do it, and teach it. Those are your 3 opportunities. Learn it is all those one pagers, that library of information I talked about. Do it is things you can do right now, opportunities we found for you. Go to do it and search under open calls. You're going to find grant opportunities, open calls to apply for grants. Anything we find that we think is sex worker friendly or relevant, we're putting in there. So go check out Air Directory, go to do it and look for the open calls. There's also job opportunities,
Yeah.
conferences, happenings, protests, all sorts of stuff. So go to newmoonnetwork.org and check out the New Moon Fund and apply for a micro grant. If you are leading a sex worker or survivor led organization in the US, we want to give you $1,000. So go ahead and apply.
Amazing. 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 There's so many great resources here. I'm just kind of scrolling through Air directory right now, which is just incredible. I'm going to do that on my free time though. But everyone else that's listening here, I mean, I wanted to maybe quickly go over, was there anything in terms of New Moon Network that you wanted to highlight in terms of like programming or anything like that before we dive into questions?
Thanks. Yeah, I would love for people to check out the New Moon Fund and apply for a micro grant if you have an organization. But if you're an individual advocate, with lived experience in the sex trade. Sorry, clients, this isn't for you. It's just for people who have provided erotic services, whether by choice or coercion. Go to Spokes Hub. We host this with Woodhull Freedom Foundation. If you go to New Moon Network, you can find Spokes Hub, but come and join your colleagues and learn some skills and build some camaraderie with your advocacy network.
Hells yeah. I mean, need more. Like, honestly, there's so many great community spaces, but like, please, I know that you guys are always asking me, like, I need to talk to someone about something. I need community. This is your opportunity to do that. So Spokes Hub, check it out. It's a New Moon Network. Guys, quickly, because I know that, Savannah, I've taken a lot of your time today, but I've been like a sponge and just taking everything in. So I'm loving it, which is great. I did want to go over a question that did come up from the audience, which I think is a really great question, and we'll take a little time to answer. So this person from X writes in, Project 2025 clearly states that all forms of pleasure work or performance should be illegal. How can we demonstrate that we are businesses just like any other entrepreneurs? And how do we get our message out?
That's a great question. I would start by acknowledging that there are immovable forces. There are people who authored or co-authored or who will help implement aspects of Project 2025 that might not be reachable. We could talk to them all day, and they might just think that we are dirty, dirty whores and dirty whoremongers, and not worth listening to truly. That's not to say that people who are radicalized on the right cannot be de-radicalized. They can, but that takes some pretty deep relationship building and probably an aha moment on that person's behalf. So, but look for the movable people. Look for people who maybe voted for Trump and thought that was a good idea. People who have values similar to your own, but maybe voted for Trump because they're concerned about immigration or they're concerned about their finances, and or I don't know why. I don't know. Look for common ground. Do you want the government in your bedroom telling you? Do you want the government telling you who you can and can't hug or love or how you can dress? No. Neither do I. And actually, I am concerned about Project 2025 and the government being in my bedroom and telling me who I can love, what I can watch, what I can get pleasure from when it's consensual adults creating media for me. I think that the person who maybe asked that question was talking about porn or maybe in-person sex work. I'm not sure. But look for people in your community and have those tedious conversations. It takes a lot of patience. And this is another reason why we need community. And actually, clients are kind of isolated. Clients don't have much community, but I know that there's a lot of great advocates out there who are also clients of sex workers. And I would love to find a way for you to have community as well, because you're doing important work talking to your community about your right to watch porn, your right to go to a strip club, your right to see an escort. You have those human rights too, and you are in this movement with us. How do we get our point across? Patience, tenacity, and understanding that this is a long haul.
Yes.
We're not going to see changes overnight. I tend to be somebody who is into capacity building and building a strong movement. I want to build a strong movement over time that can withstand heavy hits.
Right.
Whereas some people look for making big change through something like a court case. And I think that both are valid. So for instance, Roe v. Wade in the United States, that was a court case that established the right to an abortion. And then we had a Supreme Court that overturned it. But it's like that court case, Roe v. Wade, enabled access to abortion for potentially millions of people for several decades. That's powerful work.
Yes.
And then it got taken away from us through the Supreme Court. There are myriad ways that change happens. Some people that you call that impact litigation. Impact litigation is using the courts to make change. I'm more of a movement, community, and coalition organizer. I want to get the everyday people impacted by the issue and the organizations all on the same page to address the legislature together. And then there's culture. There are groups that are storytellers or building relationships in community. and helping everybody understand each other, so that you can all have conversations when there's an election, or have conversations when there's a bill, and not let campaigning messaging affect you more than your community conversations. That's critical work. And that's
Right.
actually incredibly important in the US, where we're so 50-50 polarized. We got to be talking to each other
Yeah.
and building those relationships. So that's all to say that there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, to use an ugly phrase. And you got to find the one that works for you.
Right.
And you got to find the people who you can work with, because working in isolation is a great way to burn out.
Yes.
And you don't want to burn out. So just find a sustainable way to keep on keeping on, right?
Oh my gosh, sound advice, Savannah. Like, that's so many good nuggets there in that answer. And I hope, listener, that answered your questions. Thank you so much for submitting that and joining in on our conversation. But Savannah, before I let you go, where can we all find you?
Go to newmoonnetwork.org to find these opportunities and resources that I talked about. That's really most important to me. I am on Twitter, as long as that's a thing. I'm very active there, but I'm also on Blue Sky. My name is Savannah Sly. You can go to savannahsly.com and try and figure out how to meet me in person if that's what you want to do. I make it a little tricky these days, but it can be done. Yeah, I mean, those are great ways to find me. And if you like rock and roll, check me out on Spotify.
There we go. And all those links are in the show notes below, in addition to all the other links that are also mentioned throughout the episode. So if you haven't been clicking around, now is a good time to do so and do your part. And if you are a listener that wants to get in touch with me, or you want to give me some feedback on the episode, love to hear from you. I am found on X, again, as long as that is a thing. It's Stripped by Sia. I'm also under the same name on Stripped by Sia on Blue Sky as well. Instagram is a little bit different, Stripped by Sia podcast, because that one was taken down. The original one was taken down. I know. Are you even a sex worker if you haven't been suspended or deleted in some form or capacity? Though there's some really great places you can get in touch with myself. If you're wanting to come onto the show, my DMs are open. My website is open as well. There's a contact page with a form there that you can go ahead and fill out if you're interested in coming onto the show with a great topic. I'm happy to work and collaborate with you on developing an episode. So please do so with your pitch, your talking points. Would love to hear from you all. And as I mentioned at the top of the episode, ratings, reviews, all very, very, very helpful. This is free information that I've been giving to you on a weekly basis every single week, almost every single week for the past 5.5 years. So if you're enjoying that, a little share, a little like, 5 stars, or whatever rating review would be super helpful in that. And it is new episodes every single Sunday, dropping at midnight Pacific Standard Time. And I hope to catch you all in for another episode next week. Savannah, it was so great to have you onto the show. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your expertise with our audience. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This has been great. And I will totally go and rate and review your fabulous podcast, because I get so much out of it. And it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. We'll see you everyone next week. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia. Music by Ted D. Graphic design by Maria Bellanderama, and photography by Ian Dabrin.